Okay, so mintpressnews.com is where you can get these articles. You've done a 4-part series on Jeffrey Epstein, and the 4th part is coming out soon.
Yeah, this week probably. I was hoping to take like a short break, but now that of today's events, my boss has asked me to write it, like start it and just keep writing until it's done to get it out as quickly as possible. So.
There are no breaks this week, Whitney.
No, apparently not. I kind of wish, this suicide or whatever had waited till Monday, but oh well. There goes my weekend, I guess.
Let me ask you a question, because we're going to get into some of the background that made, a guy like Jeffrey Epstein so powerful and so dangerous, especially his testimony. But just look at the actual story of the suicide. I know that you've been on Twitter. You're reading a lot of the same news sources that I am. As a journalist, as somebody who's inherently skeptical of the mainstream narrative, this guy was supposedly on suicide watch. He supposedly had tried to commit suicide. I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago. He's in one of the most tightly guarded, closely guarded facilities in America, the Metropolitan Detention Center in downtown Manhattan, which is where they held El Chapo. Is there anything weird just about forget it's Jeffrey Epstein and forget everything that we know? Is there anything weird about the consistency of the story as it stands right now?
Well, a lot of times when big stories like this break, there's always a lot of like mixed information coming out and a lot of different sources saying a lot of different things. And it usually takes, a couple days, maybe even weeks in some cases to really get through what was really going on. From this morning, I was not planning to work today, right? So I haven't looked at every source currently available on the suicide, right? But I have seen a lot of conflicting reports just from, mainstream media. So, for example, there were reports, I believe, from CNN that said that Epstein was originally taken to the hospital at 3:30 in the morning, or between 3 and 4 in the morning, allegedly for cardiac arrest. And the New York Times says that he hung himself, even though he was supposed to be on suicide watch, and took himself. And then he was taken to the hospital around like 7:30 or something like that, and he was already unresponsive. And then the Washington Post had a story where they said that Epstein had talked about how he was worried about being murdered, and that his alleged previous suicide attempt that happened a few weeks ago, that he said that someone had tried to kill him. That was the Washington Post. So there's a whole lot of different narratives, and this is just from mainstream, right? So no one's going to be throwing the conspiracy theorist label on them, right? So it's really hard to know exactly what's going on, and until that is sorted, it's going to be difficult. But the problem is that the FBI is going to be investigating that, and the person ultimately with responsibility for Epstein's death, it was from my understanding, this was sort of in a facility run more or less where the jail where he was killed by the Department of Justice. And Bill Barr, is the current Attorney General, and he's going to be, influential in the outcome of this investigation. And let's remember that Bill Barr is the guy who got his start at the CIA's office, legal counsel. I forget the exact name. Sorry, I'm blanking on it. But he helped stonewall the Church Committee in the late 1970s when they were investigating the CIA's covert activities. And of course, when he was Attorney General under George Bush Sr., in the early 90s, he helped justify the pardons of all the Iran-Contra criminals. So this is, and a lot of people that were connected to Iran-Contra, as I've pointed out on my series, were also connected to some of these sexual blackmail operations that exploited children, like Jeffrey Epstein. So the fact that Bill Barr is going to be influential in this investigation and isn't recusing himself is problematic, I would say.
Yeah, so, we've done a lot of work on this show with people like, I don't know if you're familiar with a guy named Nick Bryant who wrote a book called The Franklin Scandal.
Oh, I know. I haven't read his book, but I know I've heard him reference as sort of like the follow that his book is the follow up to John DeCamp's book on the Franklin Scandal.
That's exactly right.
Right.
And
I haven't read his work, but if people say that, John DeCamp's work was quite good. So
Nick's done a lot of work in the area of sexual blackmail. To somebody who doesn't know what we're talking about or is confused and doesn't really know why these operations are so incredibly secret and why takes so long to get any information on them, if you ever do, what would you tell somebody who's just completely unaware of what sexual blackmail is and how it's practiced by intelligence agencies and powerful people around the world?
Okay, so any CIA, like covert intelligence operation, whether it's the CIA or any other intelligence agency, they don't really like to tell or tell the public or make any sort of information about those operations transparent. It doesn't matter if it's them trying to overthrow a foreign government or it's them doing sexual blackmail operations. That's why every time, and it isn't often that the U.S. government, the federal government, tries to investigate the CIA, but when it does happen, it's consistently stonewalled. The CIA release this because it's threats to national security and whatnot. But the thing with the Epstein case and sexual blackmail operations, it's really hard to justify the use of underage children in these sexual blackmail operations and claim that's in the interest of national security, right? So that's where this becomes a problem, and that's a large reason I would say that a lot of this was stonewalled. And one of the things, for example, that was stonewalled by the CIA when the Church Committee was going on were these sexual blackmail operations that leaked out to the press during that time, and they were called, the CIA's love traps, and they would have these apartments. And they would hire either prostitutes or other people to lure foreign diplomats specifically into these bugged apartments, and the CIA would be in the neighboring apartment. There'd be like two-way mirrors on the wall, and there'd be all this recording equipment, and they'd use that as leverage afterwards. And this type of practice is very extensive. It's not exclusive to the CIA. Intelligence agencies all over the world use it. Everywhere from South Korea's intelligence agency to Israel's Mossad. It's really extensive because it's a very widely used way to get leverage over certain political players by luring them into this and then having, stuff over their heads that you can use to get them to do certain things they normally wouldn't agree to, right? So it's a decades-long strategy, and it was pioneered not by the intelligence agencies necessarily, but actually by organized crime, the mob specifically, which is what I talk about a lot in my piece.
Yes, and you did. The other thing I like about your piece is that you look at this very powerful group of billionaires who's bankrolling a lot of not only charitable organizations, but political candidates. And, they have a lot of connections all over the world. And you call them the mega group. Can you talk a little bit about them?
Sure. Well, the mega group was originally formed in 1991. It was co-founded by Leslie Wexner, who's been a big name in reference to the Jeffrey Epstein scandal because he's believed to be the main source of Epstein's wealth. And the other co-founder was Charles Bronfman of the Bronfman family. As I noted in my piece, the Bronfman family has long-standing ties to organized crime going back to Prohibition because they made their fortune, that the Seagram's company and all of that really rose to prominence because of their ties to the mob, and they were supplying Canadian liquor to the U.S. during Prohibition. And so the mega group didn't really get much media attention until there was a Wall Street Journal report on it in May of 1990. And there it talked about all these different individuals coming together to form sort of this informal group, and they would have meetings. A few times a year they would pay. They have dues of like $30,000 at least at the time. The Wall Street Journal reported on it. So this isn't some sort of like made up group, and this is the name that the Wall Street Journal gave to them. And so a lot of people here are big political players as well. One of the earliest members of the group is a guy named Max Fisher. He created the National Jewish Coalition, which later became the Republican Jewish Coalition. And today that is one of the most powerful political lobby groups in the Republican Party. President Trump's two largest donors, Sheldon Adelson and Bernard Marcus, are super involved in that group, and they're on its board. And they're also donors to that group, and it's really sort of a kingmaker in the Republican primaries. In the last Republican primary, for example, we saw Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz and Trump all vying for that endorsement from that group, and eventually Trump got it, but they tried to back Rubio first.
How is that group specifically connected to Jeffrey Epstein?
So a lot of people in the mega group are these businessmen that have ties to this network that I sort of lay out in here that Epstein is a part of. Leslie Wexner, who's the co-founder of the group, has the most direct ties to Jeffrey Epstein, as I mentioned, because his townhouse, his New York townhouse, that Leslie Wexner bought in 1989 was transferred to Epstein for just like $1, I believe, even though spent millions of dollars buying it. He spent millions more refurnishing it, including with a bathroom that people described was a James Bond-like bathroom that was lined with lead and had all the spy equipment to spy on people in the house inside. Leslie Wexner never lived in this house, and he passes it off to Jeffrey Epstein a couple of years later for no money, right? Some other people that are connected to Epstein directly would be Ronald Lauder, who I pointed out in my piece. There's a really strong case for him being the person that supplied Epstein with his Austrian passport, which was one of the things seized on the raid on his Manhattan townhouse. But, most of the ties to the mega group, what I try and show in the mega group in my piece is that they have a lot of ties. Most of its prominent members have direct ties to organized crime. So it's sort of like they use philanthropy as a cover for the fact that they're sort of part of this intergenerational mob. So, for example, Michael Steinhardt, another person who's a big name in the mega group, his dad was Mayor Lansky's jewel fence and was a member of the mob. And so what I'm trying to show in my earlier pieces, too, because the mega group where I talk about that's part 3. So I spend part 1 and 2 really laying out this whole network that has been involved in these sexual blackmail operations in conjunction with intelligence agencies for decades. And it's this specific organized crime network that I'm talking about, and I'm connecting them, the mega group, and then showing that a handful of members of the mega group have direct ties to Epstein himself. Right. So,
and it's fascinating. Now, what you did, distinguish in your piece is that when you have an operation like this that's, has a lot of these figures that are connected to the Mossad or connected in some way to Israel, there's a tendency to say, well, this is all a Mossad operation, or it's all predominantly, Jewish businessmen. But what you say is there's a lot more going on. And the idea that the Mossad would be running an operation with an American citizen and the CIA not know about it is kind of ridiculous. Like, this would have to be an operation that had the CIA's blessing if the CIA was not directly involved in. I mean, it's bigger than any one intelligence agency. It's like this dark nexus between the private sector and incredibly powerful people there and the government. And it doesn't seem to be any one government, and it doesn't seem to be like any one intelligence agency.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that people just say, "Oh, it's agency," or it's just the one intelligence agency. I mean, you have to ignore some of the ties that come up when you're investigating this case to claim that it's just one group, right? So what I try and show here is that if you step back and you look about how the really world works, there are several foreign governments that are basically they're nominally democracies, but they're often called oligarchies. Really, and the U.S. is often included in that, right? Where wealthy political donors have more influence than the regular voting public, for example. This is true in countries. And so when people are talking about the CIA and the Mossad, the Mossad answers directly to the Prime Minister of Israel. And in several Israeli elections, there have been complaints actually from people inside Israel about the large number of foreign donors who end up being kingmakers in Israeli politics. So, for example, I think it was 2009, and Netanyahu's run in 2009. It might have been 2010. I forget exactly what year it was. But one of his recent runs for prime minister, Israeli media reported that more than 90% of his donation came from foreign donors. Right. So, when we're talking about the Mossad, too, sometimes the interests of Israeli politicians, can be influenced by foreign oligarchs. That's also true in the U.S. And it's also worth pointing out that intelligence agencies in the past, including the United States, sometimes carry out covert actions or do certain things to favor oligarchs. So an example in the CIA's case would be when the CIA first began overthrowing governments in the early 50s, for example, in Guatemala or Iran. They were doing that to benefit large corporations and the people that own those corporations. So in Guatemala, it was United Fruit Company. In Iran, it was Anglo-American Oil, right?
Yeah, right.
That wasn't done for national security for the U.S., right? That was done to benefit a small moneyed class. And what I'm saying here is that when you look at a group like the mega group, for example, there's a lot of overlap between oligarchies in the U.S. and some other countries, including Israel. So that's why some people have looked at this and said it's joint CIA-Mossad. It's worth pointing out, too, that the CIA, from its early days, has had a lot of collaboration with the Mossad. This is because the first CIA counterintelligence chief, you can go and look this up, his name is James Jesus Angleton. He was the guy that was the liaison between the CIA and the Mossad, and he was very pro-Israel and worked to really forge close ties between the two intelligence agencies. I mean, this is a matter of public record. And Angleton was also the guy that was the CIA liaison to organized crime to the mob, and specifically Mayor Lansky, who is a big crime figure that comes up in here. So, it's really been this sort of, three-way relationship for a long time. And these days when Angleton was doing this was when this nexus, as I show in my reports, was really first starting to develop. And so that's how, Jeffrey Epstein really came to be who he was, because there's this network had grown and proliferated for long before him, right? So Epstein was not just a fluke, as some, more mainstream outlets have tried to say, like, oh, he's just this one random billionaire doing this horrible thing. These sort of horrible things have been going on for decades, and they haven't really gotten the scrutiny they deserve. Hopefully that will change now.
Who do you think
is gone now?
Who do you think had the most to lose if Epstein went into that courtroom? Who do you think, from your research, was, having sleepless nights the last couple of weeks?
I think actually, it's hard to say exactly. There were so many names in his book, right? His black book or whatever of contacts, that it's really hard to know exactly which ones had the most to lose. In my opinion, Leslie Wexner is a big one. Because he had gotten the most, I guess you could say, flack, because it came, Epstein's wealth was from him. It was also known that Leslie Wexner in 1996 had Epstein at his place. Epstein commissioned an artist to do work at Wexner's mansion. Epstein sexually assaulted a woman. She called the police, and Wexner's personal security wouldn't let her leave for 12 hours. And as I mentioned earlier, he gave that townhouse with that spy equipment in it to Epstein for like $1. So he definitely, maybe he wouldn't have wanted that scrutiny. Another person also, Ehud Barak, has been getting savaged in Israel, and Israel's been elections because of his close ties to Epstein, currently running against Netanyahu for the position of prime minister in Israel's elections that are coming up soon. And so Netanyahu himself, right, is under all these corruption investigations, and he was worried about that weakening his chances in that upcoming campaign. But with Epstein's arrest and all these ties to Epstein coming out, if more come out of his close ties with Ehud Barak, which are pretty much documented, then that is a lot of political fodder for Netanyahu to use against Ehud Barak. Right?
What do you think about our local darlings, Bill and Hillary Clinton, from Arkansas?
Well, I definitely think Clintons and the Trumps, both of them had ties to the same group, and they were also known to associate with Epstein. As far as, their exact ties go, I'm going to be talking about the Clintons and Epstein in part 4 of my series. We talk about a little bit about Epstein and Trump, but I definitely think, in both cases, they were definitely, they probably did not want more information coming out. I think, honestly, in both those cases, I haven't seen many victims accuse, Bill Clinton or Donald Trump directly of engaging, you could say, or getting massages, quote unquote massages, from these girls. So I think it may have been more people like, Alan Dershowitz, for example, who's been feeling the heat recently, that would be more concerned than, say, someone like Bill Clinton or someone like Donald Trump. I think a lot of other names too that have come out recently that would be more concerned. A lot of these releases that came out before Epstein died seemed to sort of clear, for some at least, it was coming out on right-wing media. They sort of cleared the air for people like Trump and Dershowitz. They gave them some more, they helped strengthen their claims that they weren't involved or something like that. So, I mean, who really, it's hard to know exactly, who stood to benefit the most from Epstein's death. So I think that may become more clear with time, but I definitely think there were so many people wrapped up in this, and it was so big, and there's been so much reporting that has kept attention, the public's attention, focused on this case. I think there were a lot of people that didn't like that specifically, and also didn't want more documents coming out. Let's remember too, Ghislaine Maxwell is very well connected herself. She's very connected. Clinton's as well, was at Chelsea Clinton's wedding, right? And she hasn't been charged with a crime. And now that Epstein is dead, there are people asking, where is she? Why hasn't she been charged, especially during the accusations against her by many of Epstein's victims? And she was his alleged, procurer of girls, his madam, or whatever you want to call it. So, I mean, she would also have an interest in him not being around, I think, as well. And let's too that her father was known to be an agent of the Mossad, Robert Maxwell, who was also known for his small media empire in England.
Do you think there's any chance that Ghislaine Maxwell gets indicted now?
I don't know. I'm really cynical. So I don't expect, the U.S. government to go after someone like her, because I honestly think, if Epstein really was intelligence and working with intelligence, by all indications, that would make Ghislaine his handler. Right. And so usually it's the handler doesn't get charged.
Right. So now when you look at Epstein's suicide, and I know you're a reporter and you might, not love to speculate, but I know you do. All of your pieces are very well sourced, very well researched. But let's say you had to speculate, what would you say happened here? Do you think it's plausible that, because even if he was allowed to kill himself, that still suggests a conspiracy because he should have been monitored, Or do you think it's possible that he was actually murdered?
I mean, like you said, I really don't like to speculate about this stuff, especially when I don't have all the facts available. Like I said earlier, it's really, there's so much information that comes out. Like this break, it's hard to know what's going on. That being said, there were a lot of people that wanted this guy dead. He had, according to the Washington Post, said that he had, that previous suicide attempt wasn't a suicide attempt, that people had tried to kill him. So I think there's a lot of different this is pre-recorded, right? Can you ask the question again? Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Okay.
I'm just basically like, if you got to go out on a limb, you got to, guess, is this a situation where...
Oh, right. Yeah, I remember now. Sorry.
Yeah. Are they leaving a cell door open? You like, how does this happen type of thing?
Well, so...
Does Hillary Clinton go in there and string him up herself? Does she dress like a prison guard?
Well, let's look at this from a couple different angles. So I brought up Robert Maxwell, right? Robert Maxwell had a very suspicious death that was ruled a suicide, right? And there's been people like former investigative journalists for the BBC, Gordon Thomas, the Mossad, that killed him because he became a liability. That even though he had done a lot of services to the Mossad and had helped them a lot in what they were and what they were trying to do with him and whatnot, that eventually he became a liability because of his business problems, his money problems, and whatever, and so they offed him. And a lot of people, even mainstream press, have pointed out that Maxwell's death on his suicide was very suspicious. He supposedly just walked off the boat and took off all his clothes before doing so, and then showed up naked, really far away from where the boat had been. And there was a lot of weird things going on there. And I sort of talk about in part 3 how a lot of this group I'm talking, this network I map out was connected to the PROMIS software and the Inslaw scandal and all of that. In the 80s, and the same year Maxwell died, in 1991, of course, Maxwell was involved in that software. Several other people that were either investigating that software or involved in the scandal ended up dying. That includes Senator John Towers, who helped sell that bug software to Los Alamos Laboratory. He died in a sketchy plane crash a few months before Maxwell. And then there was the journalist Danny Casolaro, who was investigating the PROMIS software and all of that, and he was found dead of a very suspicious suicide in a hotel room. I believe that same year too, Craig Spence was running the White House call house ring or callboy ring and all of that, that was connected to people in the Reagan administration, and was exploiting underage children for sexual blackmail purposes. He was also found dead that year. There's a tendency for people caught up at this network to turn up dead. And it's also true that sometimes intelligence agencies, when people that are their assets or their agents turn out to be a liability, or they're worried they could talk, they end up dead. And this isn't just true for intelligence agencies, it's also true for organized crime. And the fact that they had connections to both, I think should make us be very skeptical about this being a suicide, in addition to the fact that there are all these conflicting stories coming from all these different sources, and that Bill Barr, who's connected to a lot of these people I write about, is the guy that's ultimately gonna say, who did it and whether or not it was actually a suicide. So I think there's plenty of reason to question.
Okay,
What was really I hope that was enough speculation.
No, that was great. Listen, only a few more questions. You're really amazing, and I want people to read your stuff. Tell us about this PROMIS software. This is one of the most interesting things about your work that I think people should be more familiar with. From what I understand, it's a type of software where there was supposed to be like a quote-unquote backdoor that allowed Israel to spy. Let us know what that is.
Well, it's a little more complicated than that. So in the early 80s, this guy, William Hamilton, developed this software that was really revolutionary. It's supposed to be used for specific reasons for handling legal cases originally, but it also served use to intelligence because it's really a person tracking software. Because back then, remember, computers were really different. The way networks worked was really different. So, in order to get as much information as possible on a person in those days, you would have to go and search the person's name in various databases, and it was much slower. What this software let you do was just search the name in one thing, and you could look up all the databases at once, and it allowed you to amass this all this information on a person like almost immediately. And so that was really important. It was first used by the DOJ, right? And it was being used by the DOJ. It was leased to them by Hamilton's company, Inslaw. And it was it was being used by the DOJ to successfully increase their conviction and prosecution rate of money laundering and organized crime. And for anyone that's familiar with Reagan era or Iran-Contra will remember that money laundering was very important to the CIA during those days, right? So not long after that began, and a close aide of Ronald Reagan, who was also, I believe, an envoy to Iran for Reagan during this time, he had developed a friendship with the head of an Israeli intelligence agency whose name is Rafi Eitan. Rafi Eitan is probably best known in the U.S. for being the handler of convicted Israeli or Mossad spy Jonathan Pollard. And so basically, Brian was complaining to Eitan that this was being used to go after money laundering. Eitan saw an opportunity for his intelligence agency, and that they both could make a huge profit off of this. And so they basically colluded to put a backdoor into the software and then sell it to governments all over the world. I think ultimately it ended up being installed, the bugged version, by as many as 80 intelligence agencies around the world.
What did that have to do with 9/11? Didn't it have something to do with 9/11, or am I completely off base?
I think that was P-TECH you might be thinking of. Well, I haven't, I'm not going to get into 9/11 in this case, but there are some overlapping figures. I didn't talk about that here. I'm just talking about what went on in the 80s and the early 90s with that, and I'm going to be talking more about that in part 4. But I'm not going to be going into 9/11. But I have heard people on my Twitter mentions say that, but I haven't looked into that specifically at this point. So sorry, I can't give you more information on that. Right now.
Are you, so now do you think, and this is going to be my final question, because everybody should go to mintpressnews.com. Because,
yeah, that's it.
Yeah, because you are really one of the best out there. Keep doing what you're doing. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. The articles are very meaty. I read them and reread them. They're so good. Everybody should read what you write. Going forward, what happens? Is this out of the news cycle in a few days? I mean, I know that you're cynical. You have every right to be cynical. By the way, that photo didn't even really look like Jeffrey Epstein. Is there any chance that Jeffrey Epstein is back on his island right now with Bill and Hillary having mimosas?
Well, I don't want to speculate, but there have been some people that have put those pictures of him on the gurney side by side, and there have been some people that have asked questions about that. I don't really want to get too much into that, right?
Right. Well, listen, by the way, the FBI right now, the FBI right now is handing out AR-15s to nerdy white kids just so we can all change the subject.
Yeah, I'm sure it won't be long before an event comes along that will do that, to fit the playbook, so to speak. But what depends on whether or not the story dies, it really depends on the public that consumes news media and whether they let that happen.
Well, if it depends on the public, we are fucked.
Yeah, that's probably fair to say, but a lot of people on both sides have been really interested in keeping the story alive. But, a lot of mainstream outlets try and control the narrative, and if they try to keep this, if they try and kill the story, they may succeed without pushback from the public. So anyone listening that doesn't want the story to go away, it's important to keep this, going on social media and bugging journalists about why they're not covering it, if they're not covering it, things like that.
Absolutely. And tell everybody where they can find you on social media and where they can read these articles.
So all my articles right now are published exclusively at Mint News. This is mintpressnews.com. I'm only on Twitter right now. I have a Facebook, but on my author page, they wouldn't let me post links to Mint Press anymore. It might have just been, I don't know, it went on for like 2 weeks, so I just stopped using it. But on Twitter, I'm at _Whitney Webb, so you can follow me there. And yeah, that's about it. Mintpressnews.com,
on Twitter at _Whitney Webb. She's got part 4 coming out in a 4-part series about Jeffrey Epstein, his operation, and now I'm sure you'll be looking more closely at his suicide, murder, unfortunate accident, whatever you want to call it. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, Whitney. You're a killer. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Thanks, babe. All right, folks. So we're still recording. I'm going to text Mullen and see if I can grab him for 15 minutes. But mintpressnews.com. She's got a 4-part series on Epstein. It's a crazy, in-depth look at not only Epstein, but a lot of his business associates, his friends, the circles he traveled in, who these people are, what state-run intelligence agencies they're connected to, what private corporations they're connected to, and how they really move between one and the other seamlessly, how they leverage sexual blackmail, how they've done that really since World War II as a way to compromise people to get information from them. This is just another in a long line of operations that have been carried out really for the most part with impunity. There's a lot of writing about the things that have gone on, but none of it's in the mainstream. None of it is resulted in any convictions, certainly, of any of the people that were responsible for this. But it all goes back to Alexander Acosta, who was Secretary of Labor that just stepped down under President Trump, who cut Epstein the sweetheart deal. He goes, he belonged to intelligence, okay? When I believe it was the Tallahassee Police Department found a bunch of disheveled kids in a park, and they connected them to, and they arrested members of the Finders cult, and the case was dismissed. At the back of the police report, it said it became a CIA internal matter. This is not a new phenomenon of people passing the buck and saying the CIA is handling this. CIA, by the way, not supposed to be operating domestically at all, and this is, to say they're operating domestically is the biggest euphemism ever for what they're doing. But so this is a very common, or relatively common refrain from people in power. This person belongs to intelligence. It became a CIA internal matter. So there you have it, folks. Jeffrey Epstein, who is about to go into open court and potentially turn state's evidence, name co-conspirators, inform on people that help facilitate this operation on his private island, and I believe the French Virgin Islands, maybe the British Virgin Islands, found dead in his prison cell after essentially, trying to kill himself once, reportedly, being placed on suicide watch in the Metropolitan Detention Center, one of the most tightly guarded prisons in the entire world, certainly in this country, found dead. Nothing to see. There you go. We're going to be back, to The Bachelor very soon. We're going to be back to The Bachelor. Football, The Bachelor. But what's great about things like this is that wear your tinfoil hat proudly today. Okay? Sam Tripoli is out there feeling very proud right now. This is a national holiday. So wear that tinfoil hat proudly. Your family members, these basic bitch, cold brew drinking liberals that want to just, you're a conspiracy theorist, and they've been fucking talking about Trump and Russia for 24 months. And now you're the conspiracy theorist. You're a conspiracy theorist. Just know that today is your holiday. Today you are right and they are wrong. And the mental gymnastics you have to do to not believe that there is something very wrong with this situation are truly amazing. So that's Whitney Webb, man. She's done a lot of great work. And it's very cool to read some of the stuff that she's done. TimDillonComedy.com if you want to come see live shows. Tim J. Dillon, Dillon on Twitter and Instagram. Same handle, TimJDillon. This was your emergency podcast. We're probably going to get Mullen on in the next couple of days. But I wanted to talk to Whitney. She has a lot of great information. Look at all that. Do a deep dive. Get lost in that. PROMIS software, mega group. Take some time. It's Saturday. It's your weekend. Don't let anybody tell you how you have to spend it. Don't go pick up your kid. Cancel. You cancel that lunch date you have with your son or daughter. They'll understand you're busy. Okay? Shit's going on. The Tim Dillon Show. This is just a little fun emergency podcast for everybody. Audio quality was, she's Skyping in from another country. They're not letting us do this on the set of Good Morning America. So, sorry for any audio problems. But don't fucking at me. Don't complain. You got a little perspective here. Read these articles. These are fucking great articles. And Bill and Hill are sitting in Chappaqua, New York right now. Hillary's pouring hot sauce on an aborted fetus. And Bill's drinking a blood smoothie. And they're reading the New York Times. And they didn't string him up. They might not have ordered the hit. But I'll tell you right now, they're not upset. There are no tears being shed for Jeffrey up in Chappaqua, New York. Bill and Hillary. And the people that are out there like defending Bill and Hillary, what are you doing? What are you doing? I mean, okay. They didn't do it themselves, and they probably didn't even order it, but they're part of the fucking problem. They're part of the group of people that are going, whoo! You're defending these two? When will it end? I mean, they are the Bushes and the Clintons. They are 100%. They're not the bosses. They're servants. They're order takers for these big billionaires. And that is the class of people they are. But it doesn't mean it does not mean that they're not part of a very nasty and violent power faction of people. And there's certainly crime families. And there's certainly people that have benefited from this guy not fucking opening his mouth. Donald Trump maybe too. So let's get real. So stop going on Twitter and defending Hillary Clinton because she went on Ellen. Enough. Grow up. All right, thank you for listening, folks. Goodbye. Goodbye, Jeffrey.